What would you do if you overheard a conversation that could ruin a man's life? He's a millionaire, a regular at your restaurant, kind but oblivious. His best friend is a snake, poised to strike. You're a waitress, barely making ends meet, and one word from you could get you fired, leaving you with nothing. This is the story of Clara, a woman who had to choose between her own survival and the truth. She gambled everything on a single, whispered warning, never imagining that the consequence wouldn't be a pink slip, but the silent, imposing arrival of a Rolls-Royce at her door the very next day. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater. Located in a discreet, ivy-clad corner of Boston's Beacon Hill, it was where the city's old money and new tech titans came to dine. They didn't just come for the Michelin-starred cuisine or the vintage Bordeaux. They came for the ambiance of quiet power, the unspoken guarantee that their conversations would be protected by the hushed clinking of silverware and the professional deftness of the staff. Clara Hayes was part of that staff, and she was an expert in the art of being invisible. At 26, she moved through the labyrinth of linen-draped tables with a practiced grace that belied the ache in her feet and the weight on her shoulders. Each night was a performance. The smile had to be genuine, the memory for orders impeccable, and the ability to fade into the background absolute. Her life outside the Gilded Sparrow was a world away from the seared scallops and truffle-infused risotto she served. It was a cramped third-floor walk-up apartment, the constant hum of a refrigerator on its last legs, and a stack of medical bills for her mother, Eleanor, that grew with a terrifying, malignant persistence. Her mother's multiple sclerosis was a relentless storm, and Clara's meager paycheck and tips were the leaky roof that barely kept them dry. Every dollar was allocated: rent, utilities, medication, a small fund for the emergencies that were no longer emergencies, but inevitabilities. There was no room for error, no safety net. Getting fired wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a catastrophe. Among the parade of predictable faces at the restaurant, one stood out: Elias Vance. He was a regular, usually taking table 7 in the corner, with its view of the quiet, gas-lit street. In a room full of men who wore their wealth like armor, Elias wore his like a comfortable, well-worn coat. He was younger than most of the clientele, perhaps in his late 30s, with a disarming smile and eyes that seemed to hold a genuine curiosity about the world. He was the founder and CEO of Vance Capital, a name that occasionally surfaced in the financial news for its innovative and ethical investment strategies. To Clara, however, he was just the man who always asked how her evening was going and actually waited for the answer. He remembered she was studying online for a business administration certificate, and he'd occasionally ask what she was learning. He never condescended. He was just kind. For the past few months, Elias had been joined by his friend, Julian Croft. If Elias was understated elegance, Julian was polished charisma. He was handsome in a sharp, tailored way, with a salesman's smile that never quite reached his eyes. He laughed loudly, gestured broadly, and commanded the attention of the room. Clara instinctively disliked him. She'd seen his type before: men who were charming to the powerful and dismissive of the people serving them. He'd look right through her when ordering, his focus always on Elias, his words a syrupy blend of flattery and ambition. "Elias, my friend, you're a visionary," Julian would say, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "While everyone else is chasing last year's trends, you're building tomorrow." Elias would usually just smile, a little embarrassed by the praise. "I have a good team, Julian, and you find the opportunities." Their recent dinners had been consumed by talk of a single, massive project, Project Chimera. Julian had apparently discovered a groundbreaking green energy company in Germany, a startup with a revolutionary patent for hydrogen fuel cells. It was, in Julian's words, the next Tesla, but for global energy grids. He was urging Elias to make a colossal investment, a move that would not only be wildly profitable, but would also cement Vance Capital's legacy as a forward-thinking, world-changing firm. Clara, in her professional invisibility, absorbed the details. Julian spoke of encrypted data, proprietary technology, and a final capital injection that would secure a majority stake for Vance Capital. Elias, while clearly intrigued, was methodical. He asked about due diligence, risk assessment, and independent audits. All taken care of, my friend, Julian would assure him, waving a dismissive hand. I've had my people vet everything. It's pristine. We just need to act fast before a Swiss consortium swoops in. The deadline for the final wire transfer is Friday. Clara watched them, a silent observer in their high-stakes world. She saw Elias's cautious optimism, the spark in his eyes at the thought of such a monumental, positive impact. And she saw the feverish glint in Julian's, the hungry, predatory focus that made the hairs on her arms stand up. It was a feeling, an intuition she'd honed over years of watching people when they thought no one was looking. And her intuition was screaming that something about Julian Croft was profoundly, dangerously wrong. The storm that would change everything arrived on a Tuesday night. The restaurant was unusually quiet, the air thick with the promise of rain. Elias Vance and Julian Croft were at their usual table, a bottle of expensive Cabernet breathing between them. The mood was celebratory. To Project Chimera, Julian toasted, his crystal glass held high. To the future. To the future, Elias echoed. But Clara noted a flicker of reservation in his eyes. He was a careful man. This was a huge leap, even for him. The main courses had just been served when Julian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and for a split second, his mask of jovial confidence slipped. A shadow of panic, of pure, undiluted fear, crossed his face before he quickly smoothed it over. "Excuse me, Elias. I have to take this. It's the German team," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced. He pushed his chair back and walked toward the alcove near the restrooms, a small, sound-muffled space meant for private calls. Clara was clearing a nearby table, her movements slow and deliberate. It was part of her job to be aware of her surroundings, to anticipate a customer's need for a new fork or a refill of water. But tonight, her awareness was dialed to a razor's edge. She saw Julian turn his back to the dining room, his shoulders hunched as he pressed the phone to his ear. He thought he was concealed, but a large, ornate mirror on the far wall of the alcove, angled just so, gave Clara a partial view of his reflection and, more importantly, a direct line for the sound of his hushed, frantic voice. He wasn't speaking German. His words were sharp, panicked English, stripped of their usual charm. "No, you don't understand," he hissed into the phone. "The transfer is set for Friday morning. Friday. There's no moving it up. Because he's methodical. He's dotting every I and crossing every T. If I push too hard, he'll get suspicious." Clara froze, a dirty plate in her hand. This wasn't the voice of a confident dealmaker coordinating with his team. This was the voice of a man on a tightrope. "Listen to me, Dmitri." Julian's voice grew colder, more menacing. "The Shell Corporation is solid. The accounts in the Caymans are ready. Once that wire clears, we have a 30-minute window. Not a second more. The liquidation protocol has to be instant. It goes from their account, through the German shell, and then it's scattered across a dozen untraceable wallets. He won't know what hit him until Monday morning, and by then, I'll be on a beach where they don't have an extradition treaty." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Shell Corporation, Caymans, untraceable wallets. These weren't the words of a legitimate business deal. This was the vocabulary of a heist, a massive, sophisticated, company-destroying heist. Julian listened for a moment, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone. "I don't care about your nerves. You and your team were paid to create a phantom. Make sure the paperwork holds up for another 72 hours. That's all I need. If this goes south, we all go down. Do you understand me?" He hung up, took a deep, shuddering breath, and visibly composed himself. He ran a hand through his perfect hair, straightened his tie, and pasted the charming smile back onto his face. When he turned, his reflection in the mirror caught Clara's. For a terrifying second, their eyes met in the glass. Did he know she'd heard? His expression was blank, unreadable, before he turned and walked back to the table, as if nothing had happened. Clara's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt dizzy, nauseous. She retreated to the relative safety of the kitchen, leaning against the cool stainless steel of a prep station. The clatter of pots and the shouts of the chefs faded into a dull roar in her ears. Julian Croft wasn't Elias's partner. He was his Judas. Project Chimera wasn't real. It was a phantom, A meticulously crafted illusion designed for one purpose: to steal everything from a man who trusted him. The deadline wasn't about a competing offer from a Swiss consortium. It was the closing of a trap. Her mind raced. What could she do? Go to the police? With what? The ramblings of a waitress who overheard a phone call? They would laugh her out of the station. Tell her manager? Mr. Henderson would fire her on the spot for eavesdropping on a high-profile guest. His only concern was the restaurant's reputation and the flow of money. That left one option, the most terrifying of all: tell Elias Vance directly. She pictured the scene in her head. She, a nobody waitress, approaching a billionaire to tell him his lifelong friend was a con man. He would think she was insane. He would think she was a disgruntled employee trying to cause trouble. He would defend Julian, and Julian, seeing her, would know she was the one who had overheard him. He would deny everything, paint her as a liar, and make sure she was not only fired, but blacklisted from every decent restaurant in the city. She looked at her worn-out shoes, thought of the stack of bills on her kitchen table, and pictured her mother's frail, hopeful smile. The risk was unimaginable. Staying silent was the only sensible, logical choice. It was the choice of survival. But then she thought of Elias Vance, the man who asked about her studies, the man whose whole demeanor radiated a fundamental decency. He was about to be ruined, not just financially, but emotionally. The betrayal from a friend he trusted so deeply would be a wound far worse than the loss of money. Clara stood up straight, the clatter of the kitchen slowly coming back into focus. Logic and sense were screaming at her to turn away, to forget what she heard, to survive. But a deeper, quieter voice, the one that sounded like her mother teaching her right from wrong, whispered a single, undeniable truth. She couldn't let it happen. She had to warn him. The rest of the dinner service was an exercise in pure terror. Every time Clara approached table 7 to refill water glasses or clear plates, she felt Julian Croft's eyes on her. It wasn't a casual glance. It was an assessment. He was trying to gauge if she was a threat. She kept her own eyes downcast, her movements fluid and professional, praying her trembling hands wouldn't betray the frantic chaos in her mind. She had to wait. The timing had to be perfect. She couldn't say anything in front of Julian. She had to catch Elias alone. An hour later, which felt like a lifetime, Julian looked at his watch. "I've got to run, Elias. Early flight to meet a potential distributor in Chicago. You know, phase 2. He clapped Elias on the back. "I'll call you Friday morning before the transfer. We'll celebrate this weekend. The world's not going to know what hit it." "Sounds good, Julian. Travel safe," Elias said, his expression warm. Clara watched Julian leave, a wave of cold relief washing over her, immediately replaced by a surge of adrenaline. This was her chance, her only chance. Elias lingered, sipping the last of his wine. He signaled for the check. This was it. Her heart pounded in her throat as she printed the bill and placed it in the small leather folio. Her hands were slick with sweat. As she walked toward the table, she rehearsed the words in her head, but they all sounded crazy. "Mr. Vance, your friend is a thief. Project Chimera is a ghost. It was a script from a bad movie." She placed the folio on the table. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up from his phone, his kind eyes meeting hers. "Clara, everything all right?" "Sir, I—" Her throat was dry. The words wouldn't come out. This was a mistake. She was a waitress. This was not her world. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. That concern was what broke through her fear. It wasn't pity or condescension. It was simple human decency. He deserved to know. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice so no one at the adjacent tables could hear. "Mr. Vance, please forgive me. This is highly unprofessional, and I know I am risking my job by saying this, but I have to." She took a shaky breath. "Please do not go through with the wire transfer on Friday." Elise's friendly expression vanished, replaced by a wall of confusion and skepticism. "I'm sorry, what are you talking about?" "Project Chimera," she said, the name feeling like poison on her tongue. "It's not what you think it is. Your friend Mr. Croft, I overheard a phone call he made tonight. He was in the alcove by the restrooms. He was talking about shell corporations, accounts in the Cayman Islands, and liquidating the funds the moment your transfer clears. He said, he said you wouldn't know what hit you until it was too late. She delivered the words in a frantic, quiet rush, the details tumbling out. She saw the procession of emotions on Elias's face. First, utter disbelief, then a flash of anger at the audacity of her accusation, and finally a deep, troubled defensiveness. "My friend," he said, his voice low and cold. "Clara, I've known Julian Croft for 20 years. We went to college together. He's my son's godfather. You're telling me, based on a phone call you think you overheard, that he is planning to rob me?" "I know how it sounds," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I know I'm just a waitress to you, and I have no right. But the way he was talking, it wasn't business. It was theft. He mentioned a name, Dimitri. He said he'd be on a beach with no extradition. Sir, I swear to you, every word I am saying is true. Please just look into it. Delay the transfer. Do your own separate due diligence before Friday. That's all I ask." Ilias stared at her, his jaw tight. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant clink of glasses and the soft murmur of other diners. Clara felt her world shrinking down to the space between them. She had done it. She had thrown the grenade, and now she was just waiting for it to explode in her face. He picked up the leather folio, his movements stiff. He placed his credit card inside without looking at the bill. "Thank you for your concern, Clara," he said, the words clipped and formal. The warmth was gone. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was angry. He didn't believe her. Of course he didn't. She had accused his best friend, his brother, of the ultimate betrayal. He saw her as a meddling employee, a fantasist. "I'll have the manager handle this," he said, pushing his chair back. He stood up, a towering figure of quiet fury, and walked towards the front of the restaurant, presumably to find Mr. Henderson and report her. Clara stood frozen by the table, a cold dread seeping into her bones. It was over. She had failed. She hadn't saved him. She had only succeeded in getting herself fired. Julian would hear about this, and he would come after her. She had made an enemy of a man who consorted with people named Dimitri and knew about extradition treaties. She numbly picked up the folio and walked back to the service station, her legs feeling like lead. She had gambled everything, her job, her security, her ability to care for her mother, on a stranger's decency, and she had lost. The storm had finally broken, and she was standing right in the middle of it, completely alone. Clara didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the old apartment building, every siren in the distant city, sent a jolt of fear through her. She replayed the scene with Elias Vance over and over in her mind. The coldness in his eyes, the dismissive tone of his voice. She had been a fool. She'd crossed a line that should never be crossed, stepping out of her role as an invisible servant and into the lives of the powerful. And they had slapped her back down. When she arrived for her shift the next day, the dread in her stomach was a physical weight. She walked through the service entrance and was immediately met by Mr. Henderson, the restaurant's prim, perpetually agitated manager. His thin lips were pressed into a line of grim satisfaction. "Hayes, my office, now," he snapped, not even bothering to make eye contact. Clara followed him, her heart sinking with each step. The small, cluttered office smelled of stale coffee and lemon polish. Mr. Henderson sat behind his large mahogany desk, a symbol of a power he wielded with petty glee. "Last night," he began, steepling his fingers, "we had an incident, a serious incident involving one of our most valued patrons, Mr. Elias Vance." Clara remained silent. There was nothing to say. "It has come to my attention that you accosted Mr. Vance, that you harassed him with wild, slanderous accusations about his guest, Mr. Croft. You broke the cardinal rule of this establishment, Hayes. You ceased to be invisible. You made a guest feel uncomfortable. You involved yourself in their private affairs." "Mr. Henderson, I don't care what you only did," he cut her off, his voice sharp. "I received a call this morning from Mr. Croft. He was understandably furious. He said you were staring at him all night, that you followed him, and then filled his friend's head with poisonous lies. He suggested you might be unstable, a stalker perhaps." The words hit Clara like a punch to the gut. Stalker. Julian was already painting his narrative, destroying her character to protect himself. He was thorough. He was dangerous. "That's not true," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "It doesn't matter what's true," Henderson said, his voice dripping with condescension. "What matters is the perception of our clientele. We provide an escape, a sanctuary, not a stage for the staff's dramatic delusions. The Gilded Sparrow cannot afford to have employees like you on the floor. Pack your things. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you." And that was it. No discussion. No chance to defend herself. A few sentences, and the rickety structure of her life came crashing down. She had been fired. The walk back to the locker room was a blur. The sympathetic and curious glances from her fellow waiters and waitresses barely registered. She changed out of her uniform, the crisp black and white now feeling like a costume from a life that was no longer hers. As she walked out the back alley door for the last time, the reality began to set in. How would she pay rent next month? How would she afford her mother's new medication? The emergency fund she had so painstakingly built was a pittance, enough to last a few weeks at best. The shame and fear were suffocating. She walked home under a gray, unforgiving sky, the city streets feeling alien and hostile. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, its walls closing in on her. She sat on her lumpy sofa, the stack of medical bills on the coffee table seeming to mock her. She had tried to do the right thing, and in return, the world had punished her for it. Elias Vance was still heading for a cliff, and she had been thrown off of it first. The hours ticked by in a haze of anxiety and regret. She tried calling a few other restaurants, but the story was the same. They weren't hiring, or they would keep her resume on file. She knew what that meant. Word in the high-end service industry traveled fast. Henderson and Croft would make sure she was radioactive. By late afternoon, she was hollowed out, staring blankly at the water stains on her ceiling. Then a strange sound drifted up from the street below. Not a siren or a shouting match, but a low, powerful, and utterly silent hum. It was the sound of expensive engineering. Curiosity mingled with her despair, and she dragged herself to the window. Her apartment overlooked a shabby street of triple-deckers and cracked pavement. Parked directly in front of her building, looking as out of place as a spaceship, was a gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom. Its paint was so deep it seemed to drink the light. A chauffeur in a crisp gray uniform stood by the rear passenger door, his posture immaculate, his gaze fixed on her building's entrance. Clara's first thought was that he was lost, or perhaps visiting one of the professors who lived down the block. But the man was looking at her building, at her number. Her heart began to pound again, but this time it wasn't with dread. It was with a profound, terrifying confusion. Who was he here for? Then her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. Tentatively, she answered. "Hello? Is this Ms. Clara Hayes?" The voice was deep, professional, and calm. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Arthur Calloway. I am the head of security for Mr. Elias Vance. Please don't be alarmed. Mr. Vance has asked me to send a car for you. He would very much like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. The driver is waiting downstairs." Clara gripped the phone, her knuckles turning white. She looked back out the window at the impossible car and the stoic driver. Elias Vance wanted to see her, after everything that had happened. Why? Was he going to threaten her? Serve her with a restraining order on behalf of his friend? I don't understand," she stammered. "I was fired this morning." "Mr. Vance is aware of that," the voice on the phone said, with a hint of something that might have been regret. "He would like to discuss it with you. The matter is of the utmost urgency and importance, Ms. Hayes, for both of you." 1,000 scenarios, most of them terrible, raced through her mind. But beneath the fear, a tiny, fragile spark of hope ignited. He wanted to see her. He hadn't just dismissed her. He had sent his head of security. He had sent a Rolls-Royce. Something had happened. Something had changed. Taking a deep breath, Clara made her second gamble in less than 24 hours. "I'll be right down," she said. The ride in the Rolls-Royce was surreal. The city, with its noise and grime, slid by behind soundproof glass. The interior smelled of rich leather and polished wood. Clara sat on the plush seat, feeling acutely aware of her simple jeans and worn-out jacket. She was a tourist in the land of the wealthy, and she had no idea where she was being taken. The driver, a stoic man named Thomas, navigated the Boston streets with serene confidence, offering her a bottle of water but no information. They didn't go to a private club or a restaurant. They pulled into the underground garage of a sleek glass and steel skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. The building was crowned with a single elegant word, Vance. Arthur Calloway, the man from the phone, was waiting for them at the private elevator. He was a tall, impeccably dressed man in his 50s, with a calm, watchful demeanor that spoke of a life in military or law enforcement. He looked like a man who missed nothing. "Ms. Hayes," he said with a polite nod, "thank you for coming. Mr. Vance is waiting for you upstairs." The elevator ascended with a silent, stomach-lurching speed. There were no buttons for floors, only a single keycard slot that Arthur used. The doors opened directly into a sprawling penthouse office that seemed to float above the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking 360-degree panorama of Boston, the harbor, and the sea beyond. The space was minimalist and elegant, dominated by a large desk made from a single piece of dark, polished wood. Elias Vance was standing by the window, his back to her, looking out at the view. He turned as she entered, and the man she saw was not the friendly restaurant patron or the angry defensive friend from the night before. This was a different man entirely. His face was pale, his expression drawn and grim. The kindness in his eyes had been replaced by a look of profound exhaustion and something else, gratitude. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet but resonant in the large room, "thank you for coming. Please have a seat." She sat in one of the leather chairs opposite his desk, feeling small and out of place. Arthur Calloway took up a discreet position by the door. Elias walked over and sat behind his desk, but he didn't hide behind it. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I owe you an apology," he began, the words sounding heavy with sincerity. "A profound one. Last night I was a fool. I was angry and I was blinded by 20 years of friendship. I didn't want to believe you, but I couldn't ignore you either. There was a sincerity in your eyes that I couldn't shake." He paused, taking a breath. "After I left the restaurant, I couldn't sleep. Your words kept playing over and over in my head. Shell corporations, Caymans, Dimitri. They were specific, too specific for a random delusion. So at 2 a.m., I called Arthur." He gestured towards the man at the door. "I asked him and his team to do a deep dive, off the books, into Julian Croft and his German energy company. I told them to work as if the company's life depended on it. As it turns out, it did." He slid a tablet across the desk towards her. The screen was filled with documents, charts, and photographs. "The company, Heimlich Energie, doesn't exist," Elias said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "The address in Berlin is a mail forwarding service. The patents for the hydrogen fuel cells were faked, plagiarized from doctoral theses at MIT and Stanford. The German team Julian was flying to meet, a group of Russian programmers based in Riga, led by a man named Dmitry Petrov, a known specialist in corporate cybercrime, the man you heard Julian talking to." Clara stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process the scale of the deception. It was all there, laid out in cold, hard data. Bank transfers, shell company registrations, forged engineering specs. Julian's plan was meticulous, Elias continued, a bitter edge to his voice. The $200 million transfer from Vance Capital wasn't just an investment, it was a trigger. The moment the funds hit the German account, it would have activated a series of automated transfers that would slice it, dice it, and funnel it through a dozen different cryptocurrencies and offshore accounts, making it utterly untraceable within an hour. But that wasn't the worst of it. He looked her directly in the eyes. The transfer was being made from our primary liquidity fund. Its sudden disappearance on a Friday would have triggered covenants on our corporate bonds and credit lines by Monday morning. It would have created a cascade of defaults. The market would have panicked. He wasn't just planning to steal from me, Clara. He was planning to bankrupt my entire company. He wanted to destroy everything I've spent my life building. The room was silent. Clara finally understood the magnitude of what she had stumbled upon. This wasn't just a betrayal between friends. It was an act of corporate warfare. The phone call you overheard was Julian panicking because I was asking for one last independent verification of the patent data, Elias explained. I was delaying him, and his creditors, or perhaps co-conspirators, were getting nervous. You gave me the missing piece of the puzzle. You gave me the why. Your warning made me stop asking questions and start looking for answers. He leaned back, the exhaustion evident on his face. We spent all night uncovering this. We froze the transfer at 7 a.m., just 2 hours before it was scheduled. We saved the company. He looked at her, and the gratitude in his eyes was overwhelming. No, you saved the company. A waitress who was brave enough to risk her job to warn a man who was too stubborn to listen. He then looked pained. And then I found out what happened to you this morning. Julian called me, spitting venom, saying he'd taken care of the unstable waitress who was harassing us. When I realized he had gotten you fired, I can't tell you how ashamed I was. I made a promise to myself that the first thing I would do after securing my company was find you and try to make things right. He had believed her. He had acted, and she had been right. The validation was so immense, so powerful, that Clara felt a tear trace a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or fear, but of pure, unadulterated relief. I've already spoken with the board, Elias continued, his voice regaining its strength, shifting from that of a betrayed friend to a decisive CEO. We've alerted the federal authorities, the SEC, the FBI. They're all involved now. Julian's assets are being frozen as we speak. He has no idea what's coming for him. As if on cue, the private elevator chimed. The doors slid open to reveal Julian Croft, his face a mask of confusion and fury. He clearly wasn't expecting to see Clara sitting in front of Elias's desk. He had probably been summoned under some other pretense. Elias, what the hell is going on? He demanded, striding into the room. My accounts are frozen. The bank said something about a federal order. And why is she here? He pointed a trembling finger at Clara, his charming facade completely shattered, revealing the snarling desperation beneath. You! What did you tell him? What lies did you spin? Elias Vance stood up slowly, his 6-foot frame seeming to fill the room. The quiet, kind man was gone, replaced by a titan of industry about to pass judgment. She told me the truth, Julian, Elias said, his voice dangerously calm. She told me about the shell company. She told me about the Caymans. She even told me about Dimitri. The color drained from Julian's face. He looked back and forth between Elias and Clara, his mind visibly racing, searching for an escape route where there was none. That's insane. She's a nobody, a waitress. You're going to believe her over me? Your best friend? The friend who was about to liquidate my company and disappear? Elias shot back, taking a step forward. The friend who faked patents, forged documents, and conspired to commit one of the largest corporate frauds in this city's history? I saw the data, Julian. I saw the transfer protocols you set up. You were going to burn it all to the ground. Julian's desperation curdled into pure, venomous rage. You were always so sanctimonious, he spat, his voice cracking. Saint Elias, the ethical investor. You inherited a fortune and acted like you earned it. You had everything handed to you on a silver platter while I had to claw my way up, always in your shadow. I deserved a piece of it. I built this deal. I earned that money. You built a lie, Elias said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. And you tried to use our friendship as a weapon. You were going to ruin the lives of the thousands of people who work for this company, people who trust me, who have families to support. This isn't over, Elias, Julian snarled, his eyes wild. Oh, I think it is, said a calm voice from the door. Arthur Calloway stepped forward, no longer a passive observer. 2 other men, dressed in dark suits and looking equally formidable, stepped out of the elevator behind him. Julian looked trapped. The fight drained out of him, replaced by the stark, cold terror of a man whose world had just ended. He stared at Elias, his expression a toxic mixture of hatred and pleading. Elias simply turned his back on him, a gesture of finality more powerful than any words. Arthur and his men escorted a now silent, defeated Julian Croft into the elevator. The doors slid shut, and he was gone. The silence that descended on the office was heavy. Elias walked back to the window, letting out a long, shuddering breath. He had just severed a 20-year friendship and set in motion a process that would send the man who was like a brother to him to prison for a very long time. After a moment, he turned back to Clara. The hardness in his face had softened, replaced by a weary but clear-eyed resolve. "I can never repay you for what you did," he said. "Saving my company is one thing, but you also saved me from my own blindness. A simple cash reward feels insulting. It doesn't acknowledge the character you showed, the integrity, the courage." He walked back to his desk and leaned against it, looking at her thoughtfully. "When you told me your story last night, you spoke with clarity and conviction, even when you were terrified. You observed a situation, you analyzed the data you had, and you made a difficult, principled decision, understanding all the risks. That, Clara, is a rarer skill than you can possibly imagine." He paused. "I fired the manager of the Gilded Sparrow this morning, or rather my legal team had a conversation with the ownership group, and he was let go. But I don't want you to go back there. You are meant for more than that." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Vance Capital runs a philanthropic arm, the Vance Foundation," he continued. "We invest in community projects, educational programs, and small startups that have the potential to do real good. We vet hundreds of proposals a year. It requires a keen eye for detail, a sharp intuition for people's character, and an unwavering moral compass. It requires someone who can spot a lie, who can see the truth behind the charm." He looked at her directly. "I want to offer you a job, Clara, as a project analyst for the foundation. I'll pay for you to complete your business degree and any other training you need. We'll start you at a salary that will ensure you never have to worry about bills again." He held up a hand as she started to protest. "And one more thing. The foundation has a partnership with one of the best neurological clinics in the country at Mass General. We're going to take over your mother's care, completely. She will have the best doctors, the best treatments, whatever she needs. Consider it a signing bonus." Clara was speechless. The world had tilted on its axis. 48 hours ago, she was worrying about making rent. Now she was sitting in a billionaire's office, being offered not just a lifeline, but a new life, a chance to use her mind, to build a future, to finally give her mother the care she so desperately needed. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time, they were tears of shock and overwhelming gratitude. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say you'll think about it," Elias said with the first genuine warm smile she had seen on his face that day. "But I hope you'll say yes. People with your kind of integrity are the best investment I could ever make." 6 months later, the scent of rain-slicked pavement and exhaust fumes was replaced by the smell of chalk dust, old gymnasium floors, and the vibrant, electric hum of possibility. Clara Hayes stood not in a gleaming corporate lobby, but in the cavernous, slightly dilapidated community center of Roxbury, a world away from the gilded cage of Beacon Hill. She wasn't holding a portfolio. She was holding a tablet displaying lines of Python code written by a 14-year-old boy who a few months ago had been on a fast track to dropping out of high school. This was her new reality, her new office. "He built a basic inventory management system for the corner store," said Maria Sanchez, the founder of Code Forward, the startup Clara was there to assess. Maria was a whirlwind of energy in her late 20s, with tired eyes that shone with an unyielding fire. "It's simple, but he saw a problem and used what we taught him to build a solution. That's everything." Clara looked around the room. It was organized chaos. 20 older computers, clearly donated, lined the walls. Teenagers who might otherwise be on the streets were huddled together, arguing about syntax and collaborating on projects. Maria was running this entire operation on a shoestring budget, fueled by sheer force of will and a passionate belief in these kids. Clara had spent the last 2 weeks analyzing Code Forward, not just its financial statements, but its soul. She'd read the budget proposals and the grant applications. But more importantly, she had come here 3 times now to sit in the back of the room and simply watch. She saw the way Maria knew every student's name and story. She saw the flickers of understanding on young faces as complex concepts clicked into place. She saw the frustration and the breakthroughs. This wasn't a line item on a spreadsheet. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of hope. Her old life had taught her to observe the subtleties of the powerful. This new life was teaching her to see the potential in the overlooked. The numbers in your proposal are ambitious, Clara said, her tone gentle but professional. Your projected overhead seems incredibly low. Maria gave a wry, humorless laugh. My overhead is low because my salary is zero, Ms. Hayes. My office supplies are funded by my weekend job bartending. We make it work because we have to. But to grow, to reach the other 50 kids on our waiting list, we need a real investment. We need to be more than just my hobby. Clara nodded, a deep sense of respect for the woman settling within her. This was the antithesis of Julian Croft. He had built a beautiful, elaborate lie to steal from the world. Maria was building a messy, beautiful truth to give back to it. On the drive back to the financial district, the city's landscape shifted from brick and vinyl triple-deckers to historic brownstones and finally to the soaring towers of glass and steel. As the car moved between these worlds, Clara felt a sense of belonging in both. She was no longer just an observer, she was a bridge. Her phone rang, and the screen lit up with a picture of her mother, smiling in the garden of the neurological clinic. Hi, Mom, Clara answered, her voice softening instantly. Clara Bug, came Eleanor's voice, stronger and clearer than it had been in years. Guess what your old mother did today? I don't know, Mom. Did you finally convince Dr. Evans to a game of gin rummy? Her mother laughed, a sound that was pure music. Even better, I walked on the treadmill, unassisted, for 5 whole minutes. My legs felt like jelly after, but I did it. I felt the muscles working. Honey, I haven't felt that in so long. Clara closed her eyes, leaning her head against the cool window of the car service. A comfortable standard sedan, not a Rolls-Royce. These were the moments that grounded her. This was the why. That's amazing, Mom. That's incredible. It's because of you, Clara, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. You gave me this chance. Don't you ever forget the good you've done. I love you, Mom. I love you more. Now go be brilliant. I'll talk to you tonight. She hung up, a single happy tear tracing a path down her cheek. She wiped it away, her resolve hardening. She was going to get this funding for Maria, for the kids, for every person who just needed a chance. She walked into Elias Vance's penthouse office with a confidence that felt earned. The panoramic view no longer intimidated her. It inspired her. Elias was at his desk, but he stood as she entered, a gesture of respect he always afforded her. So, he said, skipping the pleasantries. Code forward. What's the verdict? We're funding it, Clara said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. She opened her portfolio and laid out her report. Here are the financials, the projections, the risk assessments. And yes, the budget is aggressive. It relies on a founder who is currently working for free and equipment that is one power surge away from becoming scrap metal. Elias raised an eyebrow, a mentor testing his student. That doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement, Clara. The endorsement isn't in the numbers, she countered, her voice steady and sure. It's in the results. It's in the waiting list of 50 kids who want to be there. It's in the founder, Maria Sanchez, who has more integrity and drive in her little finger than Julian Croft had in his entire body. The numbers tell us what it is. My analysis tells us what it could be. It's a risk, but it's the right kind of risk. It's an investment in character, not just in code. She slid her tablet across the desk, showing him a photo she'd taken of the boy who designed the inventory system for the corner store. This is a tangible return on investment, Elias. It just doesn't show up on a quarterly report. Elias listened, his gaze unwavering. He looked at the photo, then back at her. A slow smile spread across his face. It was a smile of genuine pride. Julian, he used to tell me that compassion was a liability in our business, Elias said quietly, his thoughts drifting for a moment. He said you had to be ruthless to succeed. For years I tried to prove that you could be successful and decent at the same time. He saw that as my weakness, the very thing he tried to exploit. He looked at Clara, his expression filled with a profound gratitude that still, after all these months, took her breath away. You are living proof that integrity isn't a liability. It's the most valuable asset we have. You see things, Clara, that a balance sheet can never show you. You were right about Julian, and I have no doubt you're right about Maria Sanchez. He closed her portfolio and pushed it back toward her. Fund it, full amount, and add a 10% contingency for new equipment. I don't want Maria burning out. A wave of triumph, clean and bright, washed over her. She had done it. Thank you, Elias. Thank you, Clara, he corrected her. You're steering the foundation in the right direction. You're making it better. Later that evening, as the city lights began to glitter like a fallen constellation, Clara stood by the vast office window alone, looking down at the world below. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the bone-deep weariness of her old life, the terror of that Tuesday night, the impossible choice that had turned out to be the only choice. It wasn't a fairy tale. A magic car hadn't arrived to rescue a damsel in distress. A woman backed into a corner had made a courageous decision based on her own moral compass. The Rolls-Royce wasn't the magic. The magic was the integrity that had summoned it. It was a consequence, not a gift. From this height, she could see the neighborhood stretch for miles. From the gleaming spires of finance to the humble, resilient streets of Roxbury. She was no longer just a resident of one, looking at the other with a sense of separation. She understood now that they were connected, part of the same complex human machine. And she, Clara Hayes, former waitress, had found her place not in one world or the other, but in the space between them, as a builder of bridges, a funder of hope, a testament to the extraordinary power of a single quiet voice speaking the truth. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that integrity is a currency of its own, and sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most unimaginable rewards. It wasn't about a waitress saving a millionaire. It was about one human being choosing to do the right thing for another, regardless of the consequences. That single act of courage didn't just change her life. It created a new path where she could help change the lives of many others. If this story about courage, character, and the unexpected turns life can take resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that their voice matters no matter who they are. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories that will inspire and move you. What would you have done in Clara's position? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts and we read every single one. Thank you for listening.